It was 1992. Zetland, an eastern suburb of Sydney. After an exhausting day of rehearsals, budding actress Catherine sat down to eat tea in front of the television. The sofa she sat on was one of the chattels she'd inherited from previous tenants. Ditto, table, chairs, and even the television. Same the paintings that decorated the walls of the cottage she'd just moved into. Not her style, tacky, if not functional. On the television was the weekly program Australia's Most Wanted, a spin-off of the American series, in which these police highlight cases which have grown cold, need the public's help to solve, calling on someone out there in television land to come forward with some more information, dobbing their ex-partner or friend after they've revealed their deceit whilst drunk. Tonight's episode breathed oxygen into unsolved murder cases. The 6 profiled on tonight's episode were from the last decade and a bit. All the victims are female.
Do you know who killed these women?
The police and producer outlined the details.
Cheryl Burchell.
Her body was found on the side of the road in Carrington, New South Wales in 1987. Next up, the double murder of
Catherine Pollard and Georgina Watmore
in the rural town of Cowra the same year. Then, the brutal murder of 19-year-old
Nella Poli,
again 87. Whilst the other 2 cases had no firm suspects and evidence and witnesses were thin on the ground, it was clear in this case who the guilty party was. Nella Poli had moved to Sydney from New Zealand 5 months prior, set up shop with her 37-year-old fellow Kiwi boyfriend, Grant Mitchell. Mitchell had left behind a wife and 2 kids to start a new life with his girlfriend, and it didn't work out that well. She had a job as a barmaid, and he was into construction. The police report included photos from the scene and the evidence they had about the day of the crime. Polly had decided to end the relationship and cut ties. Mitchell was locked out of the flat. Not happy with the situation, he found his way through an unlocked window. The Kiwi couple then got into a massive argument, which was overheard by the neighbours. The coroner believed her own pantyhose were used to strangle her unconscious. Then a pillow was placed over her face to extinguish her life. Then, out of sheer spite and rage, Mitchell broke open a picture frame, taking a photo of her out and sticking 2 safety pins into both her eyes. He had never been seen since. Like other cases on the television program, a loved one, in this case her mother, pleaded for Mitchell to come forward and for someone to identify him. Then, as yet more details were revealed on the television program, a shiver went down Catherine's spine. The carpet in the police photos looked exactly the same pattern as the one in her flat. The sofa could be a double as well. Even the television was a match. Kate Blanchard then came to the unenviable conclusion, a disturbing one at that. The room she now sat in, the bedroom he had entered, the one she now slept in, was the site of a murder. It was well after midnight, October 2010. A pissed 60-something Peter Bowers, badges to his mates, was travelling the road in North Queensland 40 kilometres from his home in Irvine Bank. His homemade 2-stroke spluttered away as he concentrated on keeping as far left as he could, a hard enough task when sober. It had been a big night of festivities, and with a maximum speed of just 65 kilometres per hour, he needed all the concentration he could muster to keep things together, when, just 10 metres ahead, out of the darkness, appeared a kangaroo on the road. A crash was inevitable. Bowers' collision projected him off his motorbike. He skidded along the road and lay injured, staring in pain into the sky. Banged up. Vaguely he heard the voice of others as he went in and out of consciousness. Then the siren of an ambulance. The night of the murder, Grant Mitchell took the train west, destination the Blue Mountains, and set up a makeshift camp in a remote area, mused his fate, contemplated ending his life, considered this to be the place he would die.
Some hikers will stumble on my decomposed body one day.
He wasn't exactly in a hurry to be found. By midday the next day, Mitchell knew Nella's mum would have come knocking after she hadn't answered the phone, and she had a key. The police, therefore, would be on his trail. He could, of course, hand himself in, go to jail for 15 years plus. As he thought about it, his mind spun. He wished he could go back to that fateful night, only he couldn't. Still, there was another option. He carved N.P into a tree, decided to get on the move. The doctors and nurses at the Cairns Hospital had patched Bowers back up after his accident. He had been knocked unconscious and had internal injuries. The best thing he needed to do now was rest and recuperate, avoid strenuous work. A hard task, given Bowers was an odd jobs handyman and plantation worker. His employers had come into the hospital and indicated he could convalesce back at their cottage he had on their property. There was just one thing holding up the release. The name, Peter John Bowers, date of birth 1950, didn't appear to exist. When you pay a tax in Australia, 2% of that is diverted into their health system. Medicare is what it's called, and it's a compulsory form of health insurance. The only people who have to pay for health services entering the hospital were tourists. Bowers clearly wasn't a tourist. He had a job in a house an hour down the road. Considered a bit of an oddball by those in the township of Irvine Bank, a loner. Nevertheless, a fair dinkum Aussie he was. The fault, therefore, must lie with the government, the system. However, rules were rules. No one was allowed to leave the hospital without paying the cost of treatment. Cairns Hospital made it Bowers' problem now, his to sort out. The bill he left the hospital with for the 10 days of care, 11,000 Australian dollars. That was money he didn't have, and that, I have to say, wasn't his biggest problem, the one he was angsting most over. Peter Bowers knew the authorities would flag his case. First to the dominoes, being the taxation office, they would soon be sniffing around, wanting to know how he was persona non grata in their system, and not just Medicare. Question his life living between cash job to cash job. Peter John Bowers spent 3 sleepless nights at his employer's house, then disappeared. Needed to stay low for a while. There were plenty of remote bush huts he knew from his past explorations, just perfect to hole up, re-emerge with a different name. Sunday morning, the police station in Atherton, Queensland's tablelands, a day normally reserved for dealing with drunken activities from the night before. The 9th of January 2011 would be one to remember, when in wandered a bedraggled man, insistent on speaking to the highest-ranking policeman on duty. When he came to the counter, the man said,
My name is Grant David Mitchell. I'm wanted for a murder in 1987.
The gobsmacked policeman led him to the office. Then, when his story was authenticated with the police in New South Wales, he was now under arrest, facing extradition down south and a trial for murder. Justice, finally, after 24 years on the run. During that time, he used a variety of false names, lately Peter Bowers. His days going bush, restarting elsewhere, reinventing himself, were over. Being bashed up in that collision with the Kangaroo, combined with his age, meant he was now incapable of living roughed as in the past. Cognisant after the hospital stay, the authorities and locals now knew there was something fishy about him. In 2012, he went to trial. Nella's mum gave a passionate speech about the trauma he had caused, how they never gave up hope he would be found, burst into tears every time she would hear her daughter's favourite songs. Given these circumstances, the callous nature, the narcissistic tendencies, those affected, well, they would be pretty disappointed at the sentence handed out. Mitchell, he would only end up serving the minimum term, 10 years, then go straight from the Australian jail onto a plane, deported back to New Zealand in 2021. Whereabouts today? Unknown. I personally doubt Mitchell would have handed himself in and taken responsibility for his actions were it not for that fluke accident. He had, after all, had a quarter of a century to contemplate his actions, make his peace, instead of scuttling away. In the end, his itinerant lifestyle on the run wasn't real freedom. Wasted a good chunk of his lifespan looking over his shoulder. That's what I think. You tell me what you think in the comments below. Oh, and by the way, on that episode of Australia's Most Wanted, there was only one murder solved, and this was it. Those other ones remain unsolved as at today. As a side story, I've visited Irvine Bank. I went to the local pub, the more modern one set in the woodland. Anyway, it was only 11 o'clock in the morning on a weekday, perfect time for a cleansing ale. And I wander in, and there's a German lady giving the barmaid a real hard time. I thought she must have been a tourist. It turned out she wasn't. When she was unceremoniously asked out of the place mid-morning, the owner said she was a local recluse of sorts, and she just loved her liquor too much and became an angry drunk. I remember telling the staff member what the lady had said, because I understood a bit of German. A series of expletives, including a slut and thief. The owner just shook her head. She said she'd only let her back in the pub that morning, after having been banned. I therefore get the feeling Irvine Bank has its fair share of characters, in inverted commas. Don't let me put you off, though. It's a great township. I recommend that part of the world. The Mariba Museum is the best small-town museum I've been to in my extensive travels. There you go. A bit of a short one this week. Press for time, people. You know the feeling. Next episode, an intriguing UFO encounter from the 60s. On the way out, recently I did a fairly good job on an infamous New Zealand murderer called Lionel Terry. That got pissel listens. If you missed that one, give it a spin. Link below, etc, etc, etc. If you are brave, you could try delving into my extensive vault, where you'll find my collection of vintage penthouses. Discover women have pubic hair. Cripes, the articles and stick magazines from the 70s and 80s would win you a Booker Prize today. Thanks for your support of my hobby podcast cum channel. Do support the small channels on YouTube and the small podcasters. They are, after all, the last islands of originality, holding their heads above water as the rest of these platforms get drowned by AI. Even my shitty voice is marginally better than a robot. Bye for now.